Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you here to the Aspen Institute this afternoon. My name is Peggy Clark. I'm a vice president here at the Aspen Institute and the executive director of Aspen Global Health and Development. Welcome to everyone who's here with us in the room and those that are joining us through the live video and elsewhere. We have a remarkable program for you this afternoon in a very busy week where we have just finished a number of important historic events with regards to women. We are so delighted to welcome the Honorable Minister of Gender for Zambia, whose name is Honorable Nkandu Luo.
Yes.
Luo. Nkandu Luo, and also the newly appointed coordinator of maternal and child health, Dr. Ariel Pablos-Mendez, an old friend, who is also the leads on global health at USAID, one of the largest donors to global health in the world. What is so interesting about this session today is before you have two of the leaders that are really transforming global health for women and girls all over the world. And it's rare that we can have a session on global health that is really about good news, that is really about transformative news. And in any other sector, the kinds of advancements that these two individuals have led in terms of reducing lives of mothers at birth and in reducing under-child mortality is nothing short of remarkable. In the last decade, both the Honorable Minister and Dr. Ariel Pablos-Mendez have led incredible efforts in this regard. And so I am really looking forward to hearing their remarks and then to having an opportunity to question them more intensely about how we've gotten to this point here today, and then to have an opportunity for all of you to interact with them as well. Just to give you a little bit of a highlight, interestingly, when we first embarked on the Millennium Development Goals in the year 2000, Zambia was pretty much a basket case. It was leading the world in some of the most troubling numbers in terms of maternal deaths and in terms of child deaths, in terms of lack of access to basic family planning and reproductive health services, and it has seen a stunning turnaround. So much so that in 2013, our Global Leaders Council for Reproductive Health, which is supported by our partners at USAID, and I'd like to give a shout out to Carmen Tull, who's in the front row there, got one of our globally recognized Resolve Awards for their remarkable work in increasing family planning services throughout the country of Zambia. And then Dr. Mendez, of course, who I met, and I really just want to take a moment to tell you this. The first time I met Ariel, I need to say this, it was at the Rockefeller Foundation, and it was, I think, maybe about 10 years ago, and we were in a big meeting on global health, and there was one person who was really passionate, and who was waving his arms around, and he was talking in this highly optimistic fashion about what was termed universal health coverage. And at that time, very few people talked about that. Very few people talked about the notion that every person in a country could receive equal access to services. And Ariel had just come from very important work in Mexico with the Minister of Health, at that time was Julio Frank, doing a major reform called Pro Popular in Mexico, where he saw that it could be done. And so since that time, Dr. Ariel Mendez has been leading us in really pushing the frontier on what's possible. So that was 10 years ago. And then just recently, a few years ago, someone came to me for a different meeting on a different subject, and they said, I took this train and I happened to be sitting next to somebody who was telling me that we could end preventable child deaths for all children under 5 in the world. Have you ever heard of this man? His name is Dr. Ariel Pablos-Mendez. And so he will be able to share with you today some of the really remarkable dreams and visions and goals and plans we have in place to keep the momentum going on this issue. And then, Honorable Minister, it's rare that we get to have you here in DC. I think this is your first time at the Aspen Institute here in our DC offices, so we're honored to have you. I do want to say that many of your colleagues at your mission in New York have been actively involved with our team working on reproductive health I would also like to recognize we have a number, I believe the ambassador is here with us today. There's His Excellency Palan Malunda, Ambassador of the Republic of Zambia. Thank you for joining us. And also Ms. Daisy Nakuka Ngamba, Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Gender and Child Development. And I believe we have James Chisenga, First Secretary of Economics, Embassy of the Republic of Zambia with us, as well as a wonderful set of colleagues from the Zambian Embassy who've joined us today, so welcome. I'd like to invite the Honorable Minister to give us her opening remarks before we move into the dialogue. Just to tell you a little bit more about her, the Honorable Minister was appointed in February of this year as Minister of Gender and Child Development. This is very interesting in and of itself, that there's a whole ministry for gender and child development, which we believe she'll tell us more about. Her political career began in 1996 when she was elected to Parliament. She has served as Deputy Minister of Health and later as Minister of Health. And she led the restructuring of the ministry in a very significant way to be in line with decentralization. She also has reached across ministries within Zambia to prioritize, has resulted in significant increases in support for health-related issues. She's done extensive research and policy development around HIV/AIDS prevention and treatment. She herself was trained as a microbiologist. It was very interesting, with a PhD in immunology from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. She's an honorary lecturer at the School of Medicine, University Teaching Hospital in Lusaka, Zambia. Just to put this in perspective, I know your remarks may touch on these, but for the rest of the audience to recognize the progress in Zambia in terms of health is really nothing short of miraculous. They've increased spending on primary care and reproductive health by 50%. One of the reasons we gave them the award, the Resolve Award, was they are embarking on an ambitious plan to have 650 new rural health posts, which present a very interesting integrative approach to delivering primary care and reproductive health. They have increased the access to contraceptives from a low of 15% to 41%. It's almost tripled. Maternal mortality has dropped by 40%, and malaria deaths have dropped by 67%. And those are only some of the remarkable achievements. And so congratulations to you on your new post, and thank you for offering your remarks to us today.
Thank you. Well, let me say how grateful I am for being afforded this opportunity to come and share the Zambian situation with the rest of the people, not only here in Washington, but maybe across who may be listening to us. I just want to start by saying Zambia is very, very committed to the reduction of maternal deaths and child deaths, and through the promotion of reproductive health rights. And our major focus is actually on girls and children, because we believe that investments in children is going to give us a healthier population in Zambia, and this has very, very strong implications for economic development, which we are working very hard on. And because of this realization, the first thing I want to say is that Zambia has gone through a number of restructuring, which you have touched on, and because of the interest of time, I'll not go back on those. But I think in the last 3 years, one of the things that we did as a government was to recognize, first of all, the importance of promoting public health. And what we did as a government is to separate the ministries so that we leave the Ministry of Health primarily just dealing with clinical care, and in that regard, we start making sure that our institutions like the University Teaching Hospital is upgraded to be able to give better clinical services and also take on some of the most challenging operations like open heart surgery and so on. But then focus on the primary health. And that's where the whole issue of the 650 health posts that you're talking about come into play. Because we want to make sure that we we uphold our vision of reaching or taking health as close to the family as possible. But we also have done some very drastic actions. One is the fact that we realize that conditions like cervical cancers amongst girls is increasing. Therefore, we started a very aggressive program of ensuring that all our young girls are vaccinated against cervical cancer. And that's a program that the government has invested in heavily in partnership with yourselves here, the US government. Secondly, 3 of us ministers were part of the team of ministers who went to sign up for introducing comprehensive sexual education in our country. And interestingly, compared to our colleagues from other countries, 3 of us ministers were present to sign up alongside with our colleagues, namely the Minister of Health himself, myself. At the time I was holding a different portfolio, which was responsible for rural development, the Minister of Chiefs and Traditional Affairs, as well as the Minister of Education and the Minister of Community and Mother and Child Health. So there were 4 of us ministers to show that Zambia is very committed to ensuring that we promote comprehensive sexual education. Secondly, Zambia, working through a consortium of 10 ministries, is right now spearheading a campaign against child marriage. And we look at child marriage as something that if we deal with it, we will actually deal with all the other problems, because it's like an octopus. When a child gets married early and they are exposed to early sex, they are likely to suffer from cervical cancers, HIV infections, they will be gotten out of school, so it has economic and development connotations and so on. So 10 of us ministers are part of this consortium, and I was driving the agenda in my previous portfolio of Minister of Chiefs and Traditional Affairs. But the other ministries involved education, justice, home affairs, and labor, local government, youth and sport, etc., etc. And this campaign is very robust in Zambia, and our traditional leaders are the main campaigners, because we see it as a rural phenomena too. But since then, we've now got 3 bills before us. One is the child codification bill. We also have the marriage bill on the table, and we've managed to revise our gender policy to take into consideration all these other issues. The other important program that we've launched also in Zambia is the reduction of teenage pregnancies. And we were privileged to have even the Deputy Executive Director for UNICEF travel to Zambia to come and preside over the launching of the reduction of teenage pregnancies and also the campaign against child marriage. So, the list is very long to just show how committed as a country in the investment into our children and our women, because these are the partners in development. And you cannot exclude a whole 52% of the population, because that's the population of Zambia. 52% are women. And if you exclude them, then what development are you talking about? And we cannot exclude the children, because they are the future of tomorrow. So our focus as a government is on these women and the children. And maybe as we continue with the dialogue, we'll be able to pick up some more issues.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you so much. That's really congratulations on your success so far already. I'm really delighted to welcome you, Dr. Ariel Pablos-Mendez, who this is his first remarks in Washington in his very important new role as coordinator for maternal and child survival at U.S. Agency for International Development. Dr. Mendez was appointed by President Barack Obama to lead the Global Health Bureau at USAID, which is the premier agency in international development. And on March 2nd, I think this was last week, you were appointed in this new role as Child and Maternal Survival Coordinator, spearheading really an agency-wide effort to end preventable child and maternal deaths. Dr. Mendez has had a number of important roles with the Rockefeller Foundation for a number of years, working on universal health coverage with WHO. As you mentioned in our room, in our little conversation before, you are from Mexico, and you were very involved in profound reform in the country of Mexico. I think you're most known, as you said in the other room, for your optimism, but let me really just take this opportunity on behalf of all of us to congratulate you on your new role and to say that, you know, we're really with you in this march ahead, and we would love to hear more about what we can all do to support you in achieving the goals that you have set before you. So thank you, Ariel.
Thank you, Peggy. Thank you very much. And thank you all for joining us today. Thanks to the Aspen Institute. Aspen is a thought leader in all things good, including Peggy's leadership with the awards that we have been putting together in the Council of Leaders in Geneva. And I'd be happy to be a partner in crime with you on that. It's been a successful story. And it's also a pleasure to be here with Honorable Minister Luo. Her story, her personal story, is one of achievement and determination, and I think her success is an inspiration for all of us, but also it bodes well for her tenure in the new ministry of gender in Zambia. So congratulations and all the best on that. This is the 50th anniversary year of the family planning program of USAID. So we've been working in this space for a long time. Our commitment remains, and we are indeed the largest donor in the space of family planning. We have also been and remain the largest donors in maternal and child health. The American people has been very generous with bipartisan support for the cause of maternal and child health. And I think as Peggy alluded to, I'm an optimist, and yes, who would have said that talking about universal health coverage 70 years ago will now be in one of the targets for sustainable development. Mm-hmm. And so clearly good things can happen or the idea that we can end preventable child and maternal death. So I don't want you to believe that being crazy optimistic, but then you get a phone call from the White House and invite you to join. It's just, so maybe it's good to be crazy optimistic. But it wasn't just crazy. Both the universal health coverage agenda is modeled not on aspirations, because everybody can agree on the desirability, but it was modeled on the incredible economic transformation taking place in the world, including in Zambia. Mm-hmm. Africa, that in the year 2000 was considered a basket case by the economists, is now one of the fastest growing regions in the world. And the economic transformation of Africa invites new opportunities, because growth is now ensures that there will be resources, but if the resources are not well organized in an efficient and equitable manner, you end up with an explosion of unregulated private provision paid out of pocket, which is very inefficient and regressive. So the arguments have been strong, and not only Mexico, but Thailand and Ghana and Rwanda and South Africa and Turkey, China, pretty much Obamacare here too. There's been a wave that is the best thing to do to organize your health financing in the future. For any preventable child maternal death, the optimistic vision likewise is rooted on hard evidence. In the last 20 years alone, the world has helped save 100 million children's lives. 100 million children's lives. It's larger than many countries. And this has been well documented because global health has been very good at measurement. Demographic health surveys, fertility surveys, national health accounts. In 1970, there used to be 17 million children dying every year. 17 million every year. By 1990, 12 million. The population was growing, but the number of kids dying was fewer. Mm-hmm. Today, probably close to 6 million. We're not necessarily going to zero right away, because some kids died even in rich countries. Mm-hmm. But the vision that we have put forward to end preventable child maternal death is a grand convergence in the levels of mortalities of the rest of the world and that enjoyed in rich countries. This grand convergence is already here. We are almost 80% of the way there. The target is to reach 20 or 25 per thousand under 5 mortality. And we are going together. In this generation, our generation, we will see that grand convergence at the global level. That's probably the most important historical development in terms of equality in the world for health. And within countries, you still need universal coverage to make sure that inequalities within countries will not be shaped for the future, but actually done better. Today, A woman's maybe bleeding in Nairobi goes to a hospital, and this was in the papers, and her life is now saved. You can go to a place, there's a way to help. But now they sometimes keep it in some places in private jails until they can sell their livelihoods to pay for the bills. So we have to celebrate the great success, have bold ideas, but make sure we organize our systems in the best possible way going forward. And this is a very important year. 2015, here in Washington, we have a new Congress, as many of you know. And as I said, bipartisan support has been key to this agenda of empowering women and saving the lives of mothers and children. It's also a pivotal year because it's the end of MDGs, and now we are entering the negotiation period for the post-2015 SDGs. We're going to be looking not only at the targets, which in health we are in very good shape. We have clear targets for family planning, clear targets for maternal, for newborn, for under 5. And it's a great advantage as a sector compared to other sectors. Clarity, consensus, evidence-based. We've been working on this grand convergence vision for each of those targets, and we are in good shape. But there's also what they call the means of implementation. That is, how are we going to reach those targets? And 3 important pillars of that will be financing, human resources, and measurement. We'll be hosting here in Washington in June a summit on measurement. And we're working with the World Bank and WHO on the roadmap for results and accountability in post-2015 global health. All of the systems for measurement that countries need, including civil registration, vital statistics, the district health information systems, household surveys, national health accounts, and the like. On human resources, we're working with WHO to develop a global strategy for human resources for health. And Zambia hosted the first big summit back in 2005 on human resources. And that movement came a long way, has lost some steam. We are trying to re-energize because human resources, as we have learned with the Ebola crisis, is central to what we need to do for anything we do, from the community all the way to stewardship professional capacity at the ministries of health level. So that's the second. The third is financing. And for this arena, we are lucky, of course, that we have a lot of energy and champions on family planning. With Family Planning 2020 has been well-timed in this era of bold, ambitious games to bring Melinda Gates on board. She's been fantastic, ramping up the efforts of family planning, which is so important to everything we do. But also we have now the Global Financing Facility, and there's been a great conversation since it was announced at the UN General Assembly in September with an initial $4 billion pledge with the governments of Canada, Norway, the World Bank, and the Secretary General, Every Woman, Every Child's commitment behind it. And we are now selecting the first wave of countries. The business plan is being completed, and we hope to launch that new initiative that will be the equivalent of the Global Fund, but to support family planning, adolescence health, maternal, child, neonatal health. So we needed that piece, and it's going to be part of the future. And it's going to draw IDA loans, concessionary loans from the World Bank, which is half donation, half the country's skin in the game. We want more domestic resources. As those economies grow, the possibilities improve, but they're not automatic. She has to fight for budget. We need to help the Minister of Finance raise more of their own taxation. They already had their tax rates. We're not changing the rates, but the capability to make sure that the resources are really, the revenues come so that we can support health, education, and other important sectors. Now, universal health coverage, global financing facility, that will help a lot. But a lot of what we do is not in the formal health system of service provision. It's in communities. It's in all sorts of other things that need to happen. And we are very proud of USAID. We just launched our Youth Power initiative. It's a big platform that cuts across many sectors in the agency, led by USAID, but working across so many other things we need to do in communities, with girls, in education, in inspiration, in self-empowering initiatives. And I think that's very important. We often talk about the demographic transition. Mortality is coming down, survival is going up, a good thing. We also talk about the demographic dividend. When you succeed and you have fewer children, not only is your family better off in so many ways, including economically, but your nations are better off. And you add 2 or 3 percentage points to GDP compounded annually over 20 or 30 years. And that's been part of the boom in Latin America in Asia, and now beginning also in Africa, this demographic dividend. And I also like to speak of the demographic stretch, in which we have double life expectancy in the world, and we are going to be doubling life expectancy also in Africa in the next generation or two. And as we do that, we not only add all years to life, that would be a bit sad. We actually stretch the arc of life. And children are children longer. Youth is longer. And schooling improves. Marriage is later. Sexuality actually doesn't change. And so you get big revolutions. And we have gone through that in the North already a generation ago. This is now happening in Africa. And that social transformation, which is quite predictable from the demographies, is very important that we are there to support, because some mindsets don't change right away. And we have to be respectful of those. But at the same time, the results are happening already in many countries in Africa, and we need to work together to support how those really youth demographic social revolutions will take place from the reproductive health, reproductive rights perspectives, the equality of gender, and all of that. So we are very happy now with the moment in which we find ourselves. It's an incredible moment for history of humankind, not just global health, but the success of international development, the incredible progress and success in family planning, the leadership in Africa, the capability in Africa. I've been in this for 25 years, and it's been wonderful to be part of that transformation, and I look forward to working with all of you to continue to empower youth, to work for gender equality, and also to work together to end preventable child and maternal death in a generation. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Let me turn to you, Honorable Minister. We're talking about this pivotal moment where we are right now in 2015, coming to the end of the Millennium Development Goals and the Sustainable Development Goals. Tell us the perspective from you in this really critical leadership role that you're taking in Zambia, without using any acronyms. What are your thoughts about what during the whole rollout of the MDGs and how Zambia did or didn't benefit? And as you move into the SDGs, how can you make sure that your leadership and the progress that's happened in Zambia is still supported? What would you say, if you could, to President Obama and to Dr. Mendez about what you want to make sure happens as we craft the new Sustainable Development Goals?
Well, first and foremost, while we have been struggling to have the achievements that I shared with you, I think we sometimes you do what by training, I'm a microbiologist, what we don't believe in, where we want to firefight at the end. But as microbiologists, we believe in prevention is better than cure. What I think we need to do, which is extremely important to achieve even more than we have achieved, is to reduce poverty. Simple and basic. Because if you look at everything that has been causing problems of survival in our countries in Africa, it is poverty. And I'm using the word poverty with quote unquote, because one, Africa is one of the richest countries. You know, we have all the natural resources that you can think of. If you take Zambia, for example, Zambia has literally everything. And we house about 60% of Africa's water. So we can build our economy on anything, either water, we can build on extractive industry and what have you. But yet we still talk about poverty. So for us, we need to invest correctly alongside the developments that we have made so far. And one of the things we need to do is to reduce poverty. And if you then interrogate poverty, in a lot of African countries, poverty has a female face. And even the way we've been socialized as women in Africa, Zambia in particular here, we've been socialized to be apologetic to the world, to the country. And this has left us behind as a group. So we need to have programs that reduce poverty, programs that start asserting women from the time they are young. So they need to invest in children so that the girls have self-esteem, the girls assert themselves, and therefore education for me is key. So you cannot just deal with health. You have to deal with everything else that surrounds health. And for that reason, in Zambia, one of the programs we've been dealing with, and this program was driven by 3 women in cabinet, the current vice president of Zambia, who was the then gender minister, the minister of community, mother and child health, and myself, to empower women. And for us, we are looking at our empowerment in its entirety. And we're unpacking empowerment. That it's not just about, empowering them economically. It's empowering them in totality, in terms of their access to knowledge, in terms of education, in terms of self-esteem and assertiveness. So I think
this is such an important point. Let me follow up on that for a minute. We're sitting here in Washington, particularly of note with what you've done in Zambia is exactly what you're describing, that health is integrated with education, primary care is integrated. In Washington, D.C., multiple times, the whole government has been shut down on the issue of family planning, support for Planned Parenthood. This has become a politically hot button, an issue that's really challenging for us. And we have continued at USAID, Dr. Mendez's leadership and others, to try to make the argument that you're making so that we see the questions of choices that young girls face as more broad, and that family planning isn't a separate issue, but it's integrated. So do you have opposition in that way within your ministries, that you're in this coordination effort, or is it just us in Washington that sees the barriers in this way? And really, tell us what you think about that.
Well, I mean, for me, if you one wants to use family planning as an entry point, you can, for as long as you make the correct arguments. Because one of the reasons why we talk about poverty, which for me, I would like to say bye-bye to, is simply because that our families are too big. And when you have too big a family that you have not planned for, you don't have the resources to feed these families. I mean, for example, I come from a family of 8. My mother had 8 of us, and she had 13 pregnancies, but 8 of us survived. So, what my parents did was to say, look, we have these 8 children, we're going to invest in their education. And that has liberated us as women. So it really depends your entry point, but making the correct arguments. So you can't make the argument for family planning, but ensure that you tie family planning to survival issues, the issues of family, poverty, the issues of education, the issues of women being exposed to science and technology, and so on and so on. So the important thing is that when we sit on the table with the U.S. government, is to make the right arguments.
That's excellent. I can hear that. Did you want to add anything to those points? On that point, you said it all.
Yes, indeed.
Let me turn to another interesting point. You've talked about the fact that you have this new ministry that's focusing on girls in this broader way, and you also are focusing on women and girls. What is it like to grow up as a girl in Zambia? Tell us a little bit, paint us the picture of what it was like when you were growing up versus the dream for what you want to see, and how do you think your cross-ministerial interventions and really innovations in the health sector will help girls to get farther?
Well, I think what is important for everybody to appreciate is that just like anywhere else in the world, to grow up as a woman, even in Zambia, is extremely difficult. Because there is no price put on a woman, but there is a price put on a man. Because this man is going to be great, this man will easily get into positions of decision making, this man will be anything they want to be in the world. Even when they make mistakes, nobody talks about them. Whereas as a girl, you are judged harshly. First of all, you are socialized to think that you are you should apologize for everything, including talking, she talks too much, she doesn't behave like a girl. So a girl is not supposed to talk. So you actually have to wage through life which is extremely difficult. And therefore, the majority remain behind. Only the few wage through. And you have to be thick-skinned, because then you are being judged. And if a girl gets pregnant, this is the bad woman. They don't even talk about the man who made her pregnant, and so on. So it is very, very difficult. And that's why, for me, I see an opportunity sitting in that ministry, first of all, because I have achieved a lot. And I become an example to all the young girls. Even that I'm actually blamed for being a professor. And interestingly, I was the first woman professor after so many years in Zambia in 1993.
Wow.
That's when I became the first woman professor. So even that is used against me sometimes. But I think that I'll use this opportunity to be a mentor to many young girls, and I'll make sure that I drive programs in the ministry that advantages girls, because we are the kingmakers even. All the presidents who have been in Zambia have been voted by 52% of the population, which is the women. And we need to get the men to start appreciating who we are. And we need to make sure that we start the men to know that we are partners in national development. So investments in our health is important, investment in our education, and so on, should be something that we should do together. And coming to Dr. Mendez here, is that when we come to the table to ask for, with a begging bowl, would like to see that you listen to our arguments. I know that the US will have a lot of, our policy, this, our policy, that. So we can't work with your policy. We will respect your policy, but then you need to look at our own policy and the disadvantages that we have as women of Africa, and see to it that you also lift us out of where we are. And then this world will be a better place to live in.
You're here.
Wonderful. Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
Yes. I want to make sure we can go to questions in a minute, but I'm really compelled to ask this question because I am so moved by both of your commitment. Ariel, what lit the spark in you? Who are you? You are a man leading this major global initiative. Tell us, what lit the spark in you to do this work?
Well, the two drivers of my professional career have always been science and helping people. That's why I became a doctor, and when I was in the faculty at Columbia University in New York, we did research because there's a way to advance this cause this way. I saw patients, because you can also do that. At the Rockefeller Foundation, my mind was transformed as to the possibilities, what you can do, and of course it helps, there's an endowment. When I was in WHO, it was the same drivers. Now suddenly there was the global platform of a place that wants to use science to help the world. And those are the drivers, and that's the common denominator to all of the ideas, whether it was setting public-private partnerships in biotechnology for the poor, or the economics of universal health coverage, or the vision to end preventable child maternal death. Coming to USAID in particular, that became a no-brainer of a vision for me to shape, because of the incredible success and commitment historically the US government and USAID had for decades. And for me, as an epidemiologist looking at the big picture, it was just an incredible, beautiful picture. So it was a way for us to recognize the commitment, the hard work, the support of the American people for this area, because it's an optimistic picture, right? And in Washington, believe me, it's tricky to be optimistic. Sometimes you want to simply cry for the problem and help me. So there was a risk that you could maybe put your budgets in peril because you're saying we're doing so well. But actually, it was the big bet that it was time to change the paradigm to a bold, optimistic set of possibilities. And it's been successful. The budget for maternal child health and for family planning has been increasing each year of the Obama administration, despite threats to close governments. The commitment has been there all along, because this vision, how could you not go for it? We can end preventable child maternal death. So those have been my drivers. the context gives the possibilities, but more importantly, what is happening in the world, what is happening in Zambia, is what inspires and allows us to have that optimism. We're not there yet. There are many challenges. 6 million plus children dying, nearly 300,000 women dying, delivering access to contraceptives still not being available to hundreds and hundreds of thousands of women around the world. We're not done yet, but we feel very optimistic that we will get to a world where that will be less of an issue in this generation.
No, that's wonderful. Thanks. I want to go to questions. I do want to plant a seed of a point, which is that both the work that Dr. Mendez is representing globally with really 50% improvements in maternal mortality, access to reproductive health, reductions in child mortality, very similar to what we're seeing in Zambia. You're kind of walking a parallel path, you two. The work gets harder. Your report itself, Ariel, says that the disparities are more apparent and the work becomes harder when you're reaching out to the last mile. And you've both pointed out a couple of key interventions. One is the role of the private sector. The second is obviously supporting country-level leadership, such as the minister, and the integration across ministries. But I want to just put out for the questions and then maybe for you to think about as well, what are the key strategic levers for this last 50% when the inequities and the disparities are so profound and the work really becomes harder to achieve the results we're trying to achieve? Maybe I could just take quickly responses from both of you on that and then open it up to the floor. Would you like to begin, Honorable Minister?
Yeah, well, I think there are a couple of ladders. One of them is that there has to be political will. The people that are in key decision-making positions must decide that they want to end this. Yeah. And amongst those, which is, I think, our biggest problem in Africa, and maybe this is something that we need to interrogate in terms of the powers that ministers of finance hold. I think while, even as we drive constitutions in our countries, that we need to reduce powers of the presidents. I think it is important also to reduce the powers of ministers of finance. And it's important that ministers of finance attend forums such as these ones and come and listen to the voices of the women. I mean, for example, sitting in New York for the last few days at the CSW, I see a big gap because it's just we, the women there in the majority, talking to each other. We are basically preaching to the converted. How I would wish the CSW would insist that ministers of finance are there so that they come and listen to the songs of the women and start also inculcating in them that countries would not exist without women because the majority of the people are women. And secondly, there is merit in investing in children. Yeah. Because maybe some of the bad habits that we have at the moment are because of the way we've been socialized and how we've been made to think about the world. But if we start young, and that's incidentally one of the programs we are doing in Zambia with the support of the US government, the Boys to Men. Yeah. So that we start investing in our young boys when they are young, to start being gender sensitive and having respect for women. So that maybe our generation, when it goes, will have a better generation that will be looking at the importance of gender equality. So it's political will. Within the political will is how we change, or we have a paradigm shift in the way the ministers of finance look at issues and how the funding, which is the next ladder, it's the actual financing.
Absolutely.
Whatever we do, I can have the biggest dreams in this world. If I don't have the financing for it, I would not achieve. Right. So the third issue is just the whole financing. It's an important ladder. I think the next one is the partnership between the different players. Partnership within countries, between the government, the civil society, the private sector, or even between the two genders, a partnership between men and women. And then at international level, for me, I think a real partnership by the English dictionary between the different governments. Many a time we are seen as recipients of donations. We shouldn't be seen as recipients. We should be partners because, unfortunately, there are no fortresses to protect, for example, the United States. I can fly in anytime I want and fly out anytime I want. So there's merit in making sure that people out there in Africa are healthy. Because some of the preventable diseases we're talking about are actually infectious and they're transmissible. I was listening to news the other day that they're treating somebody for Ebola right here. But the outbreak of Ebola was in Africa. Why? Because you don't know when this virus or this parasite, fungi or bacteria gets into people's bodies. There's an incubation period. Maybe at the time I'm flying into here, I'm incubating something. So in fact, it's in the interest of the US or the European governments to protect us in Africa. And much more, it is in the interest of us women to be healthy, because you're also going to come and marry wives out there in Africa, isn't it? And bring them here as wives. So I mean, the whole thing is just that, you know, we are one, basically. And therefore, whatever help comes out to us is not help by English dictionary. It's just a partnership that we are trying to develop.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Well, thank you. And thanks again, Mr. I think that you're right that global security and global solidarity is one of the important rationales for the work we do in international development. A second very important pillar of that is just development, economic success, in peace and prosperity around the world. That's good for everybody. Good for trade, good for this, good for that. We were investing in development in South Korea. Now South Korea is a rich country. We don't need to now do it in Mexico. Mexico is doing much better now. So prosperity brings peace, and it's a lot cheaper than soldiers and this and that. And third, we do it because it's the right thing. And we all know that in the United States, there's always been that impulse to do the right thing, whether it's our faith-based community, our NGOs communities, our think tanks. We all want to do what is right for the world. And so those are the three pillars and drivers why we do international development. And in terms of what we have done, Peggy, to accomplish this goal, I think both the Family Planning 2020 has set out what we need to do, which is fundamentally about engaging countries' leadership, and that's supporting those who are champions there, because there are many challenges there, supporting in every way we can to advance all of this agenda. And with the call to action to end preventable child maternal death, we have been clear on several shifts. One, a geographic shift. We have moved now to the 24 countries that account for over 70% of all deaths. So by concentrating what the efforts remain. And I have to say, Becky, that while we have been very successful in bringing it down, and it's logical that it will get harder as you get to the most remote and this and that, but the truth is more optimistic than that. The rate of decline, the annual rate of reduction, as they call it technically, in maternal child health is accelerating. So the success is not slowing because we have been successful, it's accelerating. And in part is because of many things that we are all doing here, but also because the mindset changes. A generation or two ago, people expect children to die, or mothers to die.
Yes.
Once that shift takes place, all sort of forces really help us shift things. But then we will need resources, as we said before. So we've been increasing those resources. We have, in those 24 countries, our missions feel like we have double their NCH budget, the family planning budget. But in Africa, it will not be enough. Domestic resources will need to be mobilized. And even with that, half the countries in Africa will not have economically enough resources for all of the life-saving interventions by 2030. We will need innovation, both technology at the global level and management and ways to deliver services in creative way with communities and all of that. So, and we have to keep our eyes on results. Measurement, performance, and results will be paramount. And so for us, all of this is part of what we need to do to reach those ambitious goals.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you. Wonderful. Let me open it up. Questions, please, right here. Let me wait for the mic for 1 second. Val will bring it right over to you. Could you just say your name and your organization, please?
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Kendra Tappan. I'm from Futures Without Violence. So thank you, Honorable Minister Luo and Dr. Mendez for your commentary today and for presenting. My question is just about gender-based violence and sexual violence in terms of the work that you're doing. Minister Luo, you talked about some of the 3 key points that the parliamentarians in Zambia are doing. And so I wondered if you could talk a little bit about where sexual and gender-based violence fit into that agenda, into that program. And then for Dr. Mendez, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the research and the work and the relationship between addressing gender-based violence and sexual violence and the outcomes, MCH outcomes. So how do those 2 things play a role? What's the relationship between them? Thank you.
That's an important question. Would you like to begin?
Yeah, well, one of the examples that I talked about was child marriage. And one of the reasons why for us we are so passionate as a country about saying bye-bye to child marriage is because it is also one of the initiators of gender-based violence in its entirety, psychological, physical, sexual, and so on. So Zambia has a very aggressive program on ending gender-based violence. In fact, some few years ago, we even passed a bill against gender-based violence. And what we're doing now is to domesticate this law so that we create awareness up to the lowest unit of our communities, and so that they are made aware about the ills of gender-based violence, but more so make sure that we bring an end to it. In the delegation that we have here in the US is one of our traditional leaders who is the champion of mobilizing the rural communities around issues to do with gender-based violence. And I must also add to say that GBV in Zambia is become widely known. Part of the reason is that because there's so much awareness, and there's much more reporting about those who become victims of gender-based violence, which was not the case many years ago because a lot of people didn't know much about it. However, we still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah. Wonderful, thanks. Dr. Mendez.
Well, indeed, and I think there's probably no greater expression of that violence when a young girl has to be forced to get married and all of the other things that come with it. So we have been very much in support of what has been a successful mobilization. I think that at the UN earlier this week, one of the most successful sessions has been the energy and many partners here and elsewhere. And I think working on that is important. I said this demographic stretch transformation is an opportunity for us to advance this agenda. Empowering girls and our youth power interventions will be for us very important, because just when you grow up and you don't know better, there's nothing worse than to perhaps think that you deserve it or that you did something wrong. And changing that paradigm, to feel that to know who you are, what you want, and to just want to be all you can deserve to be. It's so very important, and it's very moving, and it's complex. You see, Secretary Clinton, then Secretary Clinton said 2 years ago that, gender violence is not cultural, it's criminal. And it's true, but it's also cultural, meaning there's a lot of factors there, individually and socially, that we need to work, that we need to address. And again, that will be important. Family planning empowers women. And it's always interesting how we of course have informed choice and voluntary family planning. Sometimes people, and we have champions on both sides of the aisle for family planning. There's more controversies on abortion, but on family planning, people understand this. It's just sometimes natural methods. You need a partner to work with you for that. And so empowering women with modern contraceptive methods is empowering. And it's very, very important, and it helps. Sometimes it's the negotiation that leads itself to trouble. And so it's not surprising that many women prefer anything that will be visible, or depending on the partner, they prefer to go to a place where you can have the confidentiality, the privacy, and the self-directive empowerment. I think for us then, that informed choice and modern contraceptive access to women is also part of the linkage. And the linkage is very clear. You succeed on that. You empower women. You have better health for women and family planning, everything else works better. I think part of the great success that we have seen in this 100 million children lives saved in the last 20 years, half was due to socioeconomic improvement, girls' education, and family planning.
Excellent, thank you. I know that you're coming up against the clock, for you have to leave. If you could indulge us to just let's take 3 more questions really quickly. The gentleman right behind you is the first hand up, and then the woman in front, and then, was there another question over here? And then you. So let's take those 3 questions and then have responses. Please, could you tell us who you are?
My name is Stephen Ram.
Oops.
I'm Stephen Ram. I'm the Director for Social and Behavior Change at the Futures Group.
Okay.
Thanks very much for this excellent discussion. A question for both of you, but Dr. Ariel, you were recently in Tanzania at an event that we helped organize, a CEO roundtable, where you were talking a lot about domestic resource mobilization for the financing and part of the grand convergence that you were speaking of earlier. I'm interested to hear a little bit more improving local tax collection, mobilizing the private sector. What are some of the ways that partner countries can really look to do that? What are the strategies, the actual tactics? These are tried many different ways in the past, and what's going to be different going forward under the global facility and in order to finance these types of initiatives?
Great,
and this
thank
optimism.
you. Thank you for that question. Let's take the 3 questions, and then I know we're going to let you scoot. Go ahead, yeah.
Hi, I'm Antigone Barton. I write the Science Speaks blog for the IDSA Center for Global Health Policy.
Great.
And my question again is for both of you, and it might be slightly tied in with the gentleman's question. We've talked about economic empowerment, about addressing poverty, and building the tax base, and also building human resources. And my question is, for the last 10 years of HIV efforts, partnerships in Africa and Zambia, home-based caregivers and treatment adherence counselors who work in the community have been an essential part of the effort. And their contribution has been measurable, the impact of their contribution, and yet they're usually volunteers, or they're paid in stipends, or they're given a bracelet or a chitenge to celebrate their input, but they have to work also to support their families. This has been an opportunity for tremendous job growth because their role is essential. And if each of you, both in terms of what USAID programs have done to further that, and also Minister Luo, can talk about why that hasn't happened, that possibility for compensating people for a very valuable contribution who are usually women.
Great,
Thank you.
Excellent, great. And then we just take the 1 more question, and then we'll have some brief response. Yes, please.
Sure. Hi, my name is Robin Shane. I'm with the Board on Agriculture and Natural Resources at the National Academy of Sciences. First of all, thank you to both of you for your admirable work. I found the invitation to this meeting in my inbox the same time someone had sent me a draft of a World Bank initiative on strengthening agriculture in Africa with a very explicit focus on women and children in agriculture. And so my question to you is, how can agricultural science, how can people working in agriculture help to improve women's health and children's health in the agricultural setting, the rural setting?
Great questions. Let me do a time check. Do you have 5 more minutes, or do you have to leave right now?
Let me address maybe the first question, and if you allow me, and then the minister can also address those and the third one. But on both questions, there's some relationship with those two in terms of the economics, underlying economics. The first thing is that you need growth before you can ask for domestic resource mobilization. In the year 2000, the whole mindset of the MDGs was ODA and debt relief. That has changed because the economics have changed. Africa is growing. It's an incredible thing. There's assertiveness, a sense of, we had an assertiveness in the 60s, 70s out of the independence war, but the money wasn't there. Now the assertiveness is better. There's education, there's infrastructure, there's resources. So that makes things possible. And so that's different from before. And indeed, the whole agenda for development in post-2015 will be a lot more about domestic resource mobilization, about transparency, about South-South collaboration, about solidarity and cooperation as opposed to assistance. When President Kennedy created USAID just over 50 years ago, he said, this is just until the ultimate day, when the countries, our partner countries, will walk on their own, right? So we are getting there in many places, not all at the same time. And so we have seen in Latin America, we have seen in Asia. What are the specific ways in which, how can you do this? How can you do this economic domestic resource mobilization? Clearly, she would like to get more money, right? If she could. So how do we do that? So there are several mechanisms. First is on taxation capacity. We're talking here not about raising the taxes, because those are difficult in every country, but given a tax rate, the taxation administration capacity, the IRS type of thing here, to make sure that revenues come into the treasury so that they can be used. How do we do that? Well, we've done that already. USAID, our economics group, has done that quite successfully in El Salvador, in the Philippines, in many countries. So we had expertise to build that capacity, and then the revenues grow. And so a little bit of investment in that capacity, IT platforms, some clerks, a few lawyers, that sort of thing. And it works. And so we are going to be doing that. PEPFAR has now, Secretary Kerry announced at USAID, we are going to be leading a $60 million initiative, 5 countries. Zambia could be potentially in wave 2 of that, to support the Ministry of Finance to generate more revenue. Second is IDA. In many of the transition countries, concessionary loans is an opportunity. Ministries of Finance have access to all sorts of finances. They have to worry about infrastructure and this and that. Why mothers? And they don't see the money. But they can get loans for infrastructure from even commercial banks. But the World Bank is an opportunity for development. So the World Bank has now committed to support this with IDA, which is concessionary loans. Basically, when you do national health accounts, half of that money is accounted as a gift because the payment is such that pretty much is like a gift, but half is still the country's own money. They had to pay some of it back. So this is a way to get some domestic resources in a way that converges with development and brings in the Global Financing Facility some grant money to also make it more appealing, but also more directed to the evidence-based, results-based efforts that we're trying to do. And third, then the private sector will be very important in the provision of services in the future. And that in a way relates to the question on community health workers oftentimes being women. And it's a complex equation there. But a government that insists in expanding the service provision to meet growing demand. Economic growth will mean growing demand for health services, growing spending for health services. It's a service-intensive sector, and because unlike agriculture, when you eventually can produce enough food to meet the demand, there's never an end to the demand for well-being, for certainty, for immortality. And that means that investment grows, labor grows, jobs will grow. In this country, when I arrived in New York 25 years ago, 12% of the jobs were in health. Now 24% of all the jobs in New York are in health. And oftentimes it will be women. Both the medical schools, where now in this country about half are women and half are men. But it's true that in community health workers, this is an opportunity for women. I think that the community health engagement, we have experiences in Ethiopia or in Bangladesh, itself is empowering for women. But if they work, they deserve to be paid. True. The question is, should they be members of the civil service system and make sure that they will have a career track in that system? And can the system absorb it? Or should they be paid in some other way, through NGOs or in the private sector? And this is a big question. In India, where almost 80% of the sector is now private, but the government still is very public-minded. And trying to do universal coverage in India with a public framework like the UK has, National Health System, which they brought about after a war that destroyed England, and there was solidarity socially, politically to get that done. We don't have that in India right now. So to have a plan, which failed, by the way, to have universal coverage with a public provision model meant you were ditching 80% of your political establishment in the sector. That was impossible politically. But in addition, it also means that you had to multiply times 5 your civil servants blueprint. If anybody has worked in governments, creating positions, how many can you create? So this is complicated. So the solution is, yes, especially women or men who work in communities, because in many countries, the solution economically is still to have community health workers. They have to be compensated. What is the right compensation? What is the mechanism? But it may not always be that it has to be growing the public provision, unless there's a national consensus for that. And if that is the case, okay, we support both NGO finance support for the community health workers or government support for the community health workers, whatever works in different settings. Right now, in the reconstruction of health systems, building back and better in West Africa after Ebola, we're so happy that Liberia has done well now. We're getting to 0, but they need to rebuild. And the rebuild of human resources will have to have a large footprint of community health workers so that the economy can allow that. It's the best way to deliver services. And we are discussing with China, the Ministry of Health, whether they are some form of civil servants or whether the NGOs will be the way to compensate for the work. But they should be compensated without a doubt.
Ariel, let me ask the Honorable Minister to give some closing remarks in response to some of those questions and others. And if you could just wait for one moment and then we can congratulate you all. Yes, please.
Well, I think the issue of taxes in Africa is something that we are really fighting. In fact, Zambia right now has just been going through a problem where when we thought that we needed to raise our revenue from the extractive industry, you had a situation where some of them said, then we are shutting down the mines. But where else do you get your resources? You can't have people come to take your resources out and then they don't want to pay taxes. So as I speak, there is negotiations going on between the mine owners and government to see how we break even so that we are able to get some resources from our resources. Okay. Talking about care work, in fact, Zambia launched a program which is called Care Work is Work. And people must be compensated. Now, this brings another debate. We are in what I call a catch-22 situation, where by tradition in Africa, and Zambia in this case, we are expected to contribute to the community, and that's how we've grown. Then within us, we are saying, no, these people must be paid. So there is a debate raging on right now. What is the best? And if we're going to compensate, what is the best way to compensate? And until this debate comes to an end, it's very difficult for me to say, well, we recognize. In fact, I'm the one who led the team to campaign, because I come also from a civil society background.
Good. And you know how important
that people must be compensated. But again, you also listen to the debate of saying, look, we are destroying our own fabric of our community because this has happened for many years. Why should it happen now? Now, having said that, I used to be Minister of Health. And at one point, we wanted to increase the salary of nurses. And when you look at the number of nurses that Zambia has, an increment of just 10 kwacha, which is something like less than $2, just shifted the whole resource base for the Ministry of Health. Basically, there was no money left for even delivery of services. So, I mean, for the last so many years, government have been trying to see how we raise domestic revenue so that we put in more money into the salary of nurses. Now, if you look at community health workers, they are even more than the number of nurses in the country. So this is something that as a government, while we do recognize that that's important, we have to trade carefully and make sure that, first of all, we find that resource base. Where will it come from? So that it doesn't come and tilt the country's revenue.
Thank you.
And coming to the agricultural question, In fact, when I talked about the campaign against child marriage, we started with 10 ministries, which I mentioned, so I won't go through them again. If you realize agriculture was not mentioned, but we have realized that it's very, very important for agriculture to be on the table as well. For the simple reason that, in fact, the producers of food in Zambia and most African countries are not the men, it's the women.
Yeah.
And when we've gone to some of the homes of child marriages, some of them have said, no, we don't want to go back to school. We'd like to do something, some entrepreneurial activity. So we want support for that. Now, the majority actually decide that they want to go to the land.
Yeah.
And so the Ministry of Lands has to come to the table, because now we have to make sure that women are given land to be able to be productive. And they can earn a living if we invest in grooming them in agriculture.
Thank you.
And for this to happen, we've brought Ministry of Information to the table so that they can disseminate information countrywide.
Okay, thank you. That's your next big bridge to cross. I want to thank you both for staying longer than you were supposed to, and I really want to ask the audience to join me. I really mean that you are both really pioneering the way for so many in the area of global health. You're an inspiration, Honorable Minister. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Mendez. Ariel, we're delighted you're in this new role. Please join me in giving a round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Minister Luo, thank you very much. And I look forward to visit you in Zambia one day.
Yes.